Okay, everyone, welcome back to my channel again. I am Richard Iriando Riswanto. I'm happy to meet you in my YouTube channel, Richard Iriando. For this topic, we want to discuss and then we want to learn together about semiotics. Once about semiotics. Have you ever stopped to think about the hidden meanings behind the image, signs, and symbols we encounter every day? Welcome to today's deep dive into the fascinating world of semiotics with Roland Barthes, where nothing is just that what it seems, from advertisements to films, fashion to everyday objects. Barthes teaches us that culture is a complex web of codes waiting to be decoded. So let's unravel these layers together, because in the realm of science, the real message is often beneath the surface. Okay, semiotics. The outline for we discuss right now. The outline, the first introduction, and the second, what is semiotics? The third, key concepts in Barthes semiotic, and the fourth, semiotic in language teaching. The fifth, semiotic in literature teaching. Next, five narrative quotes, and the last, conclusion. Now we are going about semiotic analysis in language and literature teaching. According to Roland Barthes, this presentation explores Roland Barthes' semiotic theory, which is essential for understanding how language and literature function as systems of science. Aimed at postgraduate students in English education, it highlights how Barthes analyzes the construction of meaning through signifiers and signifieds. We will look at key concepts such as denotation, connotation, and myth, and their importance in the critical teaching of literature and language. Why semiotic? Why this title? Semiotic signals the focus on science and meaning, making core to Barthes' work. Language and literature teaching explicitly ties theory to pedagogical practice. Roland Barthes' perspective highlights literature's theoretical anchor. The key message: Barthes' semiotics is not just theory, it's a tool for critical teaching. Critical pedagogy implies questioning dominant meaning in text, empowering students to decode ideologies. About Barthes' portraits, humanizes the theories, establishes his authority. And then semiotic diagram. For example, a simple signifier. For example, rose signified concept of love with an arrow. Okay, of love with an arrow. The purpose visually introduces the foundational concept students will explore. Barthes was not just a literary theorist, he was cultural critic who shows how everyday text adds film, even fashion, and then perpetuate myths. Today, we'll apply his ideas to teaching. We bridge the theory, we bridge the practice. Why should educators care? Because Barth teaches us that meaning is not fixed. When we teach literature or vocabulary, we're not just handing students facts, we're inviting them to question how to culture shapes interpretation. How the audience, by the end, you'll see how Bart's ideas can transform a simple lesson on a poem or advertisement into a lesson about power, identity, and society. Example: script for lecturing. Roland Barthes, a thinker who changed how we read text, not just literature, but everything from news headlines, for example, to TikTok videos. His central question: how do signs around us reinforce cultural beliefs? Once, how do signs around us reinforce cultural beliefs? As future educators, you can use these tools to help students read between the lines of language and literature. This slides diagram about is your first clue, and then the meaning is never just literal. It's layered about semiotics. Heading: what is semiotics? Definition of semiotics. Semiotic is the systematic study of signs, anything that conveys meaning, words, images, sounds, gestures, objects, symbols, culturally agreed, representation, for example, a heart, love, a dove, and peace. Meaning making: how humans interpret and create meaning through these signs. For example, a traffic line is a sign system. Red is signifier. Stop is signifier. Green is signifier. Go is signifier. The meaning is arbitrary, could be reserved in another culture, but social enforced. Ferdinand de Saussure model, for example. Saussure, we are going to Saussure first, 1857 until 1913, the founder of modern semiotics, proposed sign equals signifier plus signifier. Term of signifier, the definition, the physical form, the sign, sound, image, letters. Example: word tree, the letters TREE, or the sound tree. Signifying, the mental concept evoked by the signifier. Definition, for example, of signifier, the mental image of a tall plant with leaves and branches. The key points in here: the connection between signifier and signified is arbitrary or no natural link between tree and the actual plant. Meaning is relational. Tree is defined by its different. from bush or forest. And then for visual aid, use Saussure classic diagram. Yeah. For example, the word dog, that is signifier. The sign signified mental concept of canon. Now Barthes' expansion from language to culture. Barthes 1915 until 1980 took Saussure's model further. Took Saussure's model further. We discuss about key concepts in Barthes semiotics, heading core theoretical tools. The first, denotation versus connotation. Denotation, definition, the literal dictionary. The literal dictionary or surface level meaning of a sign. Example, the word rose denotes a type of flowering plant with thorns and petals. An image of a red apple denotes a red edible fruit. Connotation, definition, the cultural, emotional, or ideological meanings associated with a sign. These meanings are not fixed but shaped by society, history, and context. Example, a rose connotes romance, passion, or secrecy. For example, sub rosa. Sub rosa in Latin means under the rose, symbolizing confidentially. Symbolizing confidentially. A red apple may cannot help. A red apple may cannot help temptation, that is biblical Eve. Again, temptation, biblical Eve, or education, as in an apple for teacher. As in an apple for teacher. Why this matters in teaching? Help students analyze how two same words or images can carry different meanings across cultures. Encourages critical thinking about why certain connotations exist. For example, why is rose linked to romance? Classroom activity show students a picture of a lion. The denotation, a large carnivorous feline animal. Connotation, courage. For example, brave as a lion. Royalty, for example, lion king or danger. Okay, the second, we are going to discuss about myth. Myth. Definition, Barthes myths refers to a second layer of meaning, where a sign already combining a signifier plus signified becomes a new signifier for a broader culture idea. Myths naturalize ideologies, making them seem universal. Making them seem universal or common sense constructed. Rather than constructed. For example, wine, French sophistication. For example, wine, French sophistication. For the first, order sign denotation, signifier, a bottle of wine, a bottle of wine, signifier, an alcoholic beverage made from grapes, signified an alcoholic beverage made from grapes, sign wine as a drink. Okay, sign wine as a drink. Second order, sign myth. The sign wine now becomes a new signifier for French culture. Wine is inherently French. Sophistication. Drinking wine makes you refined. This mark this marks the reality. Okay? Wine is just fermented juice and its cultural meaning is constructed. Why this matters in teaching reveals how text adds literature media and then reinforce stereotypes or power structures. Teaches students to question natural assumption, for example, expensive better. Okay, we analyze in the classroom activity about a perfume, the denotation, a bottle of liquid, the denotation about perfume, a bottle of liquid, the connotation, luxury, the connotation, luxury, attraction, myth, beauty requires consumption or women must smell a certain way. For the third, date of the author, date of the author. The definition, Barthes argues that the author's intended meaning is irrelevant. The author's intended meaning is irrelevant. Meaning is created by readers based on their cultural background, experiences, and context. The text is a tissue of quotation from culture, not the author's sole creation. For example, Shakespeare's Hamlet. Shakespeare's Hamlet. A traditional few Hamlets. Madness is about refunds. Okay? I think you have ever listened about Shakespeare's Hamlet. Barthes' view, a modern reader might interpret Hamlet's madness as a depression, politicalism, or queer coding depending on their lens. Why this matters in teaching? Validate student interpretation. No wrong answer if supported by text or culture. Okay? For the classroom activity, teacher led correct answer to student-driven discussion. And then read a poem, for example, Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. Ask students, what does this mean to you? Compare interpretation. It's about individualism or regret or colonial expansion if read by political scholar. Now, about, for example, again, a luxury watch, for example. Sorry, I talk or I say the brand. Yeah. For example, Rolex. The denotation, layer, the analyzing, the analysis, a wristwatch telling time. The connotation, layer of connotation, the analysis, wealth, success, precision, exclusivity. Okay? The myth and analysis about Rolex success equals owning expensive things or time is money. Okay? Or time is money. That is about myth, everybody in here. I think you are very happy to listen about our learning semiotic. Okay? Semiotic. Semiotic again. Yeah? Semiotic. Okay, I'm happy with you again. Now, next, the second myth. We are going to discuss about myth. Definition: Barthes myth refers to a second layer of meaning where a sign already combining a signifier plus signified becomes a new signifier for broader cultural idea. Myths naturalize ideologies, making them seem universal or common sense rather than constructed. Example: wine, French sophistication. First order: sign, denotation, signifier, a bottle of wine. Signified, an alcoholic beverage made from grapes. Sign, wine as a drink. The second order sign, myth. The sign wine now becomes a new signifier for French culture. Wine is inherently French. Sophistication, drinking wine makes you refined. This marks the reality. Wine is just fermented juice, and its cultural meaning is constructed. Why this matters in teaching reveals how text, the literature media, reinforce stereotype or power structures. Teaches students to question natural assumptions. For example, better classroom activity. Analyze a perfume ad. The denotation, a bottle of liquid. The connotation, luxury and attraction. Myth, beauty requires consumption. Myth, beauty requires consumption. Or women must smell a certain way. For the third, the audience in here in my YouTube channel, Richard Iriando, we discuss about that of the author. The definition Barthes argues that the author's intended meaning is irrelevant. Meaning is created by readers based on their cultural background, experiences, and context. The text is a tissue of quotations from culture, not the author's sole creation. Example: Shakespeare's Hamlet. You know about the traditional view, Hamlet's madness is about refunds, the author's intent. Barthes' view, a modern reader might interpret Hamlet's madness as depression, political lesson, or choir coding, depending on their lens. Why this matters in teaching? Validate student interpretations, no wrong answers if supported by text or culture. Okay, for your as your teacher or students. Shift classroom from teacher-led correct answers to student driven discussions. Now that is about the death of author, the analysis on layer. For example, that is about a wristwatch telling the time. A wristwatch telling the time. The connotation, the analysis, wealth, success, precision, exclusivity, the myth, success, owning expensive things, or time is money. For example, a wristwatch telling the time that is about the brand of Rolex. Semiotic in language teaching. Okay, semiotic in language teaching. Applying Barthes to language pedagogy. Okay, now we know the vocabulary teaching, exploring connotation. We know the concept. For example, words carry denotative or literal and connotative or cultural or emotional meanings. Barthes teaches us that connotations shape how we perceive reality. For example, home versus house, the word of house, the denotation, a physical building, the connotation, neutral or no emotional weight, home, the word of home, the denotation, a physical building, the connotation, warm family, belonging, and safety. Now teaching activity for today. Brainstorm other words pairs. Yeah, brainstorm other word pairs. Thrifty versus stingy. Confident versus arrogant. Okay, that is about brainstorm other word pairs. You can discuss why do these words evoke different feelings? Who decides these connotations? Why it matters? Helps students grasp nuance meanings. Nuance meaning reveals how power shapes language. For example, immigrant versus expat. For example, immigrant versus expat. Critical media literacy. Yeah, critical media literacy. That is about semiotic in language teaching, unpacking myths. Yeah, we discussed before myths Barthes turn cultural ideas into common sense. News and media naturalize ideologies. For example, beauty equals thinness. For example, success equals wealth in ads. Ad analyzes a Rolex watch commercial denotation, a wristwatch denotation, a wristwatch, a wristwatch. That is about Rolex. The connotation, luxury, precision. The myth, successful people own expensive things. The teaching activity, have students find ads, for example, magazines, social media. Identify denotation and connotation. The myth being sold. The myth being sold. Rewrite the ad per the myth. For example, Rolex at reimagine at success. reimagined as success equals time with family. About Rolex. Why it matters, okay? Why it matters. Teaches students at to critique consumer culture aligns with 21st century media literacy standards. Intertextuality equals idioms, proverbs as cultural signs. The concept intertextuality texts reference other texts, for example, idioms, allusions. These are cultural codes, Barthes, that require shared knowledge. Yeah, okay, shared knowledge. That is example, Achilles' heel, origin, the Greek myth. Achilles' weakness, the modern meaning, a fatal flaw. The teaching point for today. Without knowing the myth, the phrase is confusing. The teaching point for today. Show how language preserve cultural memory. The teaching activity. You are a teacher. You can do idiom journal. Student collect idioms. For example, spill the beans, kick the bucket. Research origins, history, culture, and then how connotations shape, for example, bucket list versus kick the bucket. Why it matters, everyone. Why it matters. Helps learns the cold hidden culture references, bridges language and literature teaching, visual, for example, dictionary versus cultural meaning. Yeah? Once I give the example again. Side by side comparison. Example. The word dragon and owl. Word dragon. Dictionary definition. A mythical fire-breathing reptile. The cultural meaning of dragon. West, evil, for example, smart, and then China power lock, and then the word of owl, not cultural bird. Again, the word of owl, a nocturnal bird. Yeah, the word of owl, a nocturnal bird. And then the cultural meaning about owl, west, wisdom, for example, Hogwarts, India, bad omen. Discussion question. How might this difference lead to misunderstanding in a global communication? Okay, we practical tip. Use multimodal text. Yeah, songs, film to show semiotics action. To show semiotics action. Now we discuss about readerly legible versus writerly or scriptable text. Definition and importance. Yeah. Once I repeat, readerly or legible versus writerly or scriptable text. Definition and importance. Barthes divides literally text into two types based on how they engage readers. Readerly legible type. Traditional text with clear fixed meanings the reader passively consumes the author's intended message. Examples, classic novels, for example, Pride and Prejudice, yeah, Pride or Prejudice, yeah, and then Dickens' Great Expectation, teaching implications, focus on comprehension and authorial intent. Literally scriptable. experimental, open-ended texts that demand active interpretation. The reader writes meanings through engagement. For examples, that is postmodern works. Postmodern works. Joyce, yeah, and then Borges, yeah, and then Wake, and then Finnegan's Wake, yeah, and then Borges, Labyrinths, yeah, and then teaching implication about writerly or scriptable encourages encourages critical, yeah, encourages critical thinking and personal meaning making. Why this matters in teaching? Help students move beyond what does this mean? How can interpret this? Empower students to see literature as a dialogue, not a monologue. Classroom activity. Compare Deacon passage. Linear clear moral versus a Barkus story. Yeah, that is ambiguous layer. Okay, ambiguous layer. And the next, okay, everybody, we discuss about five narrative codes. Okay, Barthes S or Z breaks down how texts create meaning through five interwoven codes. For the first, hermeneutic code, the enigma code, the definition, the mystery, or answered questions that drive a narrative. Example, in Sherlock Holmes, who committed the crime? Teaching use, teach suspense and foreshadowing. Okay, hermeneutic code. Once I explain to you the code of questions, mysteries, and unresolved elements that create suspense and drive the narrative forward. It deals with what is hidden or postponed in a text. The key features possess explicit or implicit questions, delays answers to maintain tension, create truth effects when resolved. That is about classic simple, yeah? Explicit about Sherlock Holmes, and then implicit in Gone Girl, is Amy alive or dead? Okay? The teaching application about foreshadowing analysis have students track how the authors plan and resolve questions. Mystery writing. Students write short stories using delayed revelations. Film study map how camera angles or editing create enigmas. Okay? For example, the critical question, how does the text manipulate our desire for answers? And the second, pro-erratic code or the action code. Definition, sequences of actions that structure the plot. For example, he picked up the gun, the audience anticipates a shooting. Example, in the Hunger Games, the repeat training arena sequence. Teaching use, analyze how passing and casualty shape stories. Pro-erratic code, the action code, the definition, the code of actions, behaviors, and plot sequences that create narrative momentum. Okay? Through cause and any effect logic. The key features, chains of action with predictable consequences. Okay? Triggers reader expectations. For example, Chekhov's gun principle, and then builds tension through sequential events. Classic example again. In the Hunger Games, repeat training, arena, survival to be rebellion. In Macbeth, prophecy, murder, yeah, and then to be paranoia, yeah, paranoia, or battles, and then to be dead. Teaching application, okay? The plot diagramming. Students visually map actions sequences. Predictive writing. Stop mid-scene and have students forecast consequences. And then the genre study. Compare action quotes in romance versus thriller novels. The critical questions. How do actions create narrative inevitability? Again, the critical question. How do actions create narrative inevitability? Okay, that's it about our discussion. Okay, the third semi-code themes and character traits. The definition signs that build themes or character identities. For example, darkness equals evils, and then roses and love. Yeah, darkness equals evil. Yeah, roses equals love. Example in Macbeth, blood symbolizes guilt, teaching use, track requiring symbols in a novel, semicode, themes and character traits, definition and theoretical basis. The semicode from Greek sema, sign refers to recurrent signs that construct character, identities, or terms. Networks of association that create symbolic patterns operate through connotative meanings, but second order signification. The key features characterization through signs. A character's repeat props, colors, or diction become their signature. Example, J gets B, old sport phrase, and pink sweets signify artificially genitality. Okay? Thematic motifs, objects or words that accumulate meaning through repetition. Example, birds in the awakening, freedom, or entrapment. Okay, the classroom application. Symbol tracking journals, students log requiring symbols. And then character dossiers. Create profiles linking traits to signs and adaptation projects. Yeah, reinterpret a character semi-code visually. For example, design costumes for a modern Macbeth. And then the fourth, symbolic code or deep structure. Yeah, deep structure. The definition about the symbolic code revolves. Yeah, binary oppositions that structure culture meaning align with Levi Strauss. Yeah, and then psychoanalytic tensions, desire, repressions, conscious or unconscious, yeah, ideological conflicts, power, resistance, nature or culture, okay, and then structure patterns, light or dark in Romeo and Juliet, love versus feud, and then clean or dirty in Lady Macbeth's hand washing scene. Yeah, that is about number four or the fourth symbolic code. Now, the fifth, cultural code references to shared knowledge. Yeah, definition the cultural code, the ancient text shared knowledge system, history, religion, and then create intertextuality functions as footnotes readers must recognize. The cultural literacy. Some reference may exclude readers. Yeah. And then, for example, the critical question, who is included or excluded by this text assume knowledge. Okay, this is the conclusion for today. What semiotics transforms English education by the first critiquing power. Yeah, critiquing power and making whose ideologies are embedded in classic texts. The second, centering students. Yeah, centering students or student center, valuing their voices as meaning makers. And the third, connecting to real life. Connecting to real life. Teaching skills for analyzing media, politics, and culture. Okay? And we, with a quote, Barthes doesn't just teach us how to read text. He teaches us how to read the world. Yeah? Barthes doesn't just teach us how to read text. He teaches us how to read the world. Okay? And that's the power of semiotics. It reveals how meaning, yeah, how meaning constructed. Semiotic may be manipulated and sometimes even weaponized in our daily lives. Roland Barthes didn't just give us a theory, he gave us a lens to see the world differently. So next time you see and add a logo or even simple gesture, ask yourself, what this really saying? What is this? What is this really saying? I think you enjoy about this exploration. Yeah, our enjoyed this exploration. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Yeah, and hit the bell for more thought-provoking content. Until next time, yeah, see you again, everybody in here. See you in my YouTube channel again, Richard Iriando. Yeah, we will meet again for another content I will give about English subject or English learn for the next. See you everybody. See you, and I want to see keep healthy to all of you. Emmanuel, see you.